Hello, gang. Professor McElroy here. Let me just hide my little Zoom menu thing here so I can get the full screen. Welcome to Designing with Type, GRA 3102. Out of all the classes I teach and all the classes I have taught over the last 20 plus years or so, type class is by far one of my favorites. I absolutely love playing with type. So right, first and foremost, just kind of take the stance as, that letters, numbers, and symbols are shapes with positive and negative space. They're not necessarily symbols that associate to a sound, is what most people think of when you think about type, the alphabet, that sort of thing. We're going to be exploring the positive and negative space, the foreground, middle ground, and background elements of letters, numbers, and symbols. You can use it. Honestly, you can use any software for this class because we're going to be creating things using letters, numbers, and symbols. And we're going to kind of get you out of your comfort zone of what you think about when you have a project that involves type. And so that's why I believe so firmly in this class, in getting a grasp, the understanding of the history of type, the anatomy of type, what type does, how you can adjust the aspects of type, the personality of type, and make unique things. And so, and understanding that then pushes you into an understanding of effective logo and branding design, because that involves combination marks with symbols and letters. And the letters aren't just the written language. The letters are symbols. The letters are shapes. The letters are positive and negative space. Like, it's more than just typing a word like pizza for a logo. It's understanding the font, the serif, the sans serif, the stems, the counters, the bowls, all the shapes of the letter form, how you can play with positive and negative space, how you can scale up and scale down to change visual separation. Like, all of these things in typography are really important. Just typing a word out, or a phrase or a letter, just picking a typeface. I mean, it's way beyond that. So hopefully this 4-week exploration, which I think is the perfect amount of time to play with type, learn a little bit about type, and do a bunch of little mini projects that allow you to explore type. I think it's just a perfect sweet spot. So you'll notice, as always, I always have an introductory announcement. I like to post some kind of inspirational stuff to start off with, but I did say I see 1 or 2 of your classmates have already posted in the discussion board, and they shared some really cool stuff having to do with type. And so we're going to keep pushing that envelope of type as imagery, and kind of gets you thinking a little bit different. So when you have to create solutions, remember, they're communication solutions in design, visual communication, that you're looking beyond just typing out the letter form, that you're actually looking at the letter form, kerning and leading and line spacing and baselines and just all the stuff that goes with typography. I absolutely love it. I spend a lot of time just feeding my brain with type, what it looks like in packaging design. This Sunday's the Super Bowl, so there's going to be $7 million commercials running. I spend more time looking at the visual aspects of commercials than I actually do at the message of the commercial, because I really enjoy kind of feeding my brain with what's going on in the year 2023 around the globe. Remember, societal trends, everything's a little bit different depending on where you are, colors, textures, that sort of typography. So I like feeding my brain with that. So second announcement for the class is just some inspirational type stuff to get you thinking a little bit outside the box. And I stumbled upon a really interesting article on adobe.com yesterday, I think, and it's all about logo trends. And the reason I posted in Designing with Type class is because, remember, naturally, most brands start as combination marks, which means some written language of some kind combined with a symbol. So it was interesting to see what the logo trends are for 2023, because of course that includes typography. So take it from that standpoint, not necessarily from the logo standpoint, but the attributes of the typography and how it interacts in the brand and what the trends are for 2023. Okay, so that gets us past a little introduction here. Everyone in the cohort, this is a 3,000 level class. You've had me before, you know the shtick. We do a learning module each week. Week 1 will be learning module 1. There is not a book for this course. I removed the book a few years ago and started embedding presentation and articles into our learning modules so that you can learn a little bit by taking a look at those. to reinforce some of the skills I want you to kind of process and understand and practice. And then we'll have a couple of mini projects, each learning module, that will kind of start to push your understanding of typography and the letter form as it relates to visual communication. And so the Designing with Type class, I spent a lot of time in the lecture portion of the class, kind of highlighting things from content I embedded in the learning module. In this case, there's 4 presentations, a PDF and 3 PowerPoints in learning module 1 that lays the foundation of typography. I've done probably 30 lectures on the history of type as it pertains to advertising in the community over the years. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the presentations, highlight some of the things that I think are really important from a foundational standpoint for you to understand. And then we'll talk about our type poster project, which is a mini project, and our type anatomy project. Those are the 2 mini projects for this first learning module, just to start kind of practicing some fundamental elements of typography or designing with type. So that's the format for learning module 1, week 1. I'll try to keep the lecture to 1 hour and 45 minutes or so. And I say that, and you guys have all had me in class before and you laugh, because it can, depending on the content and how much I kind of get going on the content, sometimes it lasts a little bit longer than that, but I'm going to try to do that because many of you in this cohort are online and watch the recording later. So I don't want to go 2 and 2.5 hours with the lecture, even though I love it and I'm passionate about it, because that's a lot to ingest kind of at a sit down as you're watching the recording. So at the end of the hour and 45 minutes or so, we will delve into a little bit about the descriptors of the 2 mini projects. In this class, you can use any software application you want. If you have Word at home or PowerPoint or any software application that has a text tool, you can use it for this class. I've had students for the type anatomy class type out sentences, print them on a piece of paper, and with a pencil label the anatomy of the letters in the sentence they wrote on the piece of paper. I've had students hand draw the letters with stencils and then label them. I've had students cut out magazines to do collages for poster assignments and different things that are typography specific. So I am open to the exploration of any software application, but keep in mind, we're Adobe. Like, that's just the nature of the beast. The industry as a whole is Adobe CC, which means typography best applied in Illustrator or InDesign. Yeah, Photoshop has a text tool, but it's pixel based. So remember that pixels ain't great for type, especially when we talk about anatomy, we talk about counters and bowls and shoulders and stems and the serif feet of letter forms and baselines, all the things that are really firm and solid. Pixels to shape letters is not firm and solid. It is blurry and edgy. And that's not really the best tool, but there are so many software applications on your phone, on your tablets, on your desktops that have a text tool with the ability to move letters around and stack them. That's all you need. You literally can use anything in this class. And the reason I do that is because I have a lot of students that take this course every single time I offer it that have nothing to do with design. They just want to learn a history of type. They want to learn how to use letters better. They just want to learn about typography. So I open it up. If you have a software application that has a text tool, you can do these projects in absolutely any application. I've had students do their projects on their phone with different apps that they have on their phone, and then they just save it as a JPEG or a PDF and they submit it for the assignment. So it's more about exploration, playing with letter forms, and understanding psychologically, kind of sociologically, like how consumers interact with letters and how you can control a brand and how the consumer feels about your brand based on the typography and how you apply it. So yeah, it's easy to put a fire flame picture for people to know hot, but try picking some typography and playing with the letters and make it feel hot. Totally different ballgame, totally different, much harder. So you got to kind of understand those anatomy and elements and kind of that psychology of letter form in order to really tap into the consumer and get them supporting your product or service. Because remember, at the end of the day, we're selling a product or a service. I just had a conversation with my buddy the other night. I hadn't seen him for a while, so we got together and we started talking about today's day and age. And everyone is spending their money on experiences. So Airbnbs and Uber rides and concerts, they're not necessarily investing their money. And that things like NFTs and Bitcoins and digital currencies and just it's a new world that we live in. Everyone's an influencer on social media. I posted an image on my Pinterest board the other day of something I was messing around with for a client. It already has 9,000 views. I'm like, how is that even possible? I'm controlling brands, just throwing something out on social media, just thinking it's interesting to share it. And it's like blowing up in a couple of days. Like, it's the strangest thing to me, but it's the world we live in. So just know that type, how you write the written language in whatever language you're writing in, has a really strong influencer on the audience based on how you do it. And I'm a visual hierarchy guy, so I love playing with letters, numbers, and symbols to create a sense of hierarchy, something that is closer and something that is further away. So we're going to push the envelope a little bit. And gosh, every student I've ever had in this class, at the end of the class, they're like, my 6-year-old was helping me do my projects because they loved what I was doing. Or I got done with the class and I had no idea how much I would enjoy using letters, numbers, and symbols and just making stuff out of it. So hopefully at the end of the class, you kind of have the same vibe, because every time I do it, every time I teach it, every time I get student projects, I always love to see the creativity and what's going on as far as a new understanding of the written language. So, okay, so that brings us into learning module 1. I'm just going to open it up real quick just to do a little quick descriptor. You've all had me before. You know the setup. You know the 1.1s all the way through to whatever the wrap up item is in the folder for each of the classes. But our presentations for this first learning module, there's a short one about the history of type. I'm going to open it up and talk a little bit about key elements in the history of type. I'm going to open up the anatomy of type, and we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the letter form and what each of those terms mean as it relates to letters, numbers, and symbols. Your 2 projects, primary kind of mini projects for this class, is a type poster project, which everyone loves doing because there's not a right or wrong answer. The type anatomy flyer, which is basically us illustrating the definition of the letter forms that are in our anatomy presentation. And then I'll have a little monogram project, which is what would constitute our out of book project, because we don't have a book. It's in essence 2 little mini projects and a slightly bigger project. But think of the 1.11 as a monogram project where you're using your initials to create a brand. But we won't even talk about that until we kind of explore a little bit the 2 mini projects. And that will lead us into week number 2. So that's the lay of the land. You kind of know it from the other courses you've had with me, but I'm going to go ahead and minimize Canvas, and I'm going to open up the very first presentation inside of our learning module 1, because it's part of a lecture series I've done locally here a number of times on the history of advertising. And it all starts with the letter form, kind of the history of type. So I broke it out. There's a bunch of slides in here. I'm just going to bounce through. And even though I'm going to touch a little bit on each presentation, please go back and do a little deeper dive on it, kind of as part of the homework. Study it a little bit, because the glossary terms, the things we're talking about in this class, they're important for communicating your ideas to the outside world, whether you're talking to your boss about it because you're a designer for a company or an agency, or you have your own business and you're interacting with a client and you're trying to explain your ideas. It's really important to use the terms, the appropriate terms for what you're trying to express, because in some way, shape, or form, you're going to end up interacting with someone else professionally that may be in a similar field, and you might be sharing ideas, or you might need someone to build upon what you created. So you want to make sure they understand why you did it, what the thought was behind your idea, and just kind of express the creative side of what you're doing. So I'm going to dive through some of these things. Not quick, but quicker than I normally would. Like the type lecture here, the 50 slides, I do it over hours, over a few days when I lecture out in the community. So I'm going to go a little quicker than that, just to touch on some of the key points. But keep in mind that it is something I want you to go back and dive into a little bit deeper. You'll need to for type anatomy, because you're going to be doing an illustrative display of what the anatomy of the letter form is. So these things I want you to take a little deeper dive into as part of homework, but I'm going to highlight the things that are really important to me as it kind of pertains to what we're covering here in Designing with Type class. So I just want to make sure that we have all the same kind of foundational information about kind of the letter form, typography, where we went, where we're going, that kind of thing. So this presentation is kind of 50 mini slides, and it takes us from the Gutenberg press all the way to Futura type. So we covered the gambit, right? We're 15th century, the Gutenberg press, the beginning of a wooden letter carved on a slug or a block, ran through a roller with paper to do things like printing the Bible, like doing our first manuscripts, and just kind of getting the process going of taking the language and putting it on paper. But look at this. I mean, raw and rough, but look at the baseline. I mean, perfect, right? This is a paragraph. I mean, 15th century Germany, and we have got letter form being printed on paper, and it's sexy. I mean, it looks good. I mean, I could read this roughly because it's black letter, which means it has all these hard angles, stems, and serifs to it. I think of like vodka labels when I think of black letter, right? Alcohol labels, they do this harsh thing, or heavy metal bands or something like that. Right? They get into this really harsh letter form, but just know that 15th century Germany, I mean, Gutenberg press, I mean, we're starting to get the letter form here, right? You got to understand the slug, and the letter form is carved in the block, wood then to metal, and it has this space down the bottom, and no letter form fits perfectly on this block, and it sits on a track, and they put lead in the track to separate the lines of type. Like, this is where typography started. Students fall in love with just typing words on a page now, and it auto kerns and auto leads, and it does everything for you. It doesn't mean that it's right? Letters have all unique shapes to them. They sit on what's called the baseline different. Their cap height or their X height are different. Like, every part of the letter is unique. So auto stuff on the computer, digital typography, doesn't mean that type it out and it's the answer. So just know that right now. When I studied type, I had to cut the letters out on little pieces of paper and then put a ruler line and use magic tape and manually kern all the words in my ads so that you could really see the space between letters, the character spacing, the line spacing. You just type it out now and do auto kerning, auto leading. You don't even know what half of it means. You just type a paragraph out, you hit enter every once in a while, and you make something. You may text wrap it a little bit around an image, and you're like, wow, this looks great. Yeah, it looks okay. But just know that as you kind of magnify the process, logo designers go way beyond that into spatial recognition between how much of an ascender or a descender there is in the letter form. You know, logos they look like they're typed out, but actually some of the letters are slightly bigger and slightly smaller than the other letters based on their weight, their line weight, what font the designer chose to use. Everything is manually kerned. Everything is manually spaced. I mean, it's not just type it out on a keyboard. It says IBM, put a stamp on it and pay me $5,000, right? That's all manually adjusted. And then the letters are actually tweaked. They're not what you type out in the keyboard. Why do you think they have like an Apple font? Because the original designer created its own letter form for the Apple logo, and then they created an alphabet from it. So the importance of understanding where type came from as we push through into a digital age where everything has a digital application. Just know that we started with little wooden slugs that sat in a tray called majuscule and minuscule for large and small letters, and they put them in a tray and they spaced them out with little leads and little block chunks in order to create paragraphs. And that's important to know because the essence of a lot of the typography used started with some dude or lady that created the font, and they manually dropped everything in, and the way they're shaped is because of the application they were used for, not because they thought it looked cool. They made it because it was something they needed to make in order to write the language the way they wanted to write it to communicate whatever the product or service or whatever they were trying to communicate. So just know we went all the way back to 15th century here. So, and here's what I'm talking about, right? Trays of uppercase and lowercase slugs that, you know, you use, and you have one font, and it's, this is where it all started. I mean, this is where it all started. And we've come a long ways. At the end of this class, we're going to design our own typeface. I mean, who would have thought you could design your own typeface, first off? And secondly, you can download it as a true typeface and upload it into your font book, and you can type it out in Word like you would Caslon or Times New Roman or any of the other things. I mean, it's really crazy how far we've come. This used to be an art form that, was for an elitist, someone who had trained in it and understand how to do it. And now anyone can create their own typeface and use it in advertising or anything else much easier than you ever could before. So just know it started here with an artisan and a block of wood, and everything was carved out. Now, the reason I have a point just to highlight the history of type is that I'm sure many of you have used Adobe Jensen. 1470. I mean, seriously, Adobe reintroduced, kind of reshaped, modernized this letter form based on its original personality, properties, anatomy. But oh my gosh, 1470. I mean, people don't even realize when they go into a character palette and they just pick type, the history behind what's going on here. And I only have to look no further than the P in this letter form, and I'm like, oh man, I like this. And I use Jansen for a traditional, historical, like classic, feels like it's been around forever, because it has. I use it a lot in advertising if I need that feel. But would you know that it had that feel if I didn't tell you that it was created in about 1470? I mean, knowing the history of letters can help you choose the personality, the property, the history behind. It's kind of like ancestry.com, right? You want to learn about the history of family members, you go on there. Well, sometimes it's important to understand things like the history of letter forms to know what would be most appropriate to use in any application based on kind of the history of that typeface. It was created for a reason. So just kind of know that. And you can see it. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, look at this J with this really elongated stem. I mean, I happen to love typography. So to me, this is like really sexy to have the H with this kind of a little bit of a swath here. It curves in a little bit as an italic typeface, but it's beautiful. I mean, this thing is beautiful for classic typography. But if you didn't know it was 1470, you would just type it out and say, okay, it looks good as a serif. It's skinny, it's tall. It kind of could do the part for me, and just kind of leave it at that, right? So you get into 16th century and you start dealing inexpensive small format printing, right? So this is where you're starting to get into these long page books, right? The monks aren't illuminating books with a brush and ink anymore. I mean, we're starting to produce novels. I mean, we're starting to produce books, right? And so I'm just going to quickly go through some of this history just so that you can, I mean, look at the Q here. I mean, that's a Zorro kind of scripty swash there. I mean, it's just beautiful. I mean, I could just go on and on about typography, right? But know that Torrey was a designer, painter dude that believed that the letter form should mimic the anatomy. And you've probably seen that from Leonardo, right? He has an image that looks very similar to this for the human body. And so he started kind of this concept idea that's the human form for the letter form. And this is called a crossbar right here. So just so you can start to see the circular nature of his ideas, right? A lot of geometry involved. So circles to create the serifs. I mean, a lot of math, a lot of personality behind the typeface of what was being created here, specifically for engraving and things like that. But really, really beautiful typography, right? Caslon, I'm sure you've used it. 18th century. Caslon's one that's like Jensen, really beautiful kind of typography here, crisp, upright letter forms. I love the roundedness of the letter form. So if you're ever looking for a serif typeface that's got a really bowl oriented or rounded or has like a really big footprint, square footprint, that Caslon's a really beautiful one for you. And all it's doing is showing you or highlighting you the idea of a steel pen and quill, right? Ink-based letter forms created more in a reproduction kind of style. But look at that personality of in all caps as it gets smaller. Look at it in italic or script versus regular block letter form. I mean, you should really start to see that the personality of the type. Look at all the family members listed right here. Family members are the versions of the typeface. So you should know as a designer, the more family members there are, the more flexible you are with your design, because the rule of thumb is you really should be using 2 typeface styles when you're doing a visual communication, an advertising piece, a design piece of some kind. You shouldn't flood your design with 7 different fonts. It should be 2, 3 tops. And I only say 3 because you may choose a script. And if you choose a script, it's nice to have a serif and a sans serif typeface as part of a body copy typeface, and then what we call subtext typeface. So maximum 3 if you choose a script. Normally, the rule of thumb is 2. Body text, and then more prominent header style text, traditionally a serif and a sans serif. And that's kind of how you build your brand manual. But, you know, just quickly, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but Baskerville, another one you've probably seen, right? 18th century, Jensen, Caslon, Baskerville. I mean, this is beautiful. I mean, you could open up just about any book. Gosh, even nowadays, you could buy a little paperback, little novels you read at the pool or at the beach if you read. I mean, a lot of them are written in a style like this, because look how beautiful it is and indented. It's got a rubric letter to lead off the paragraph. I mean, it's got indenting. I mean, it's beautiful. A lot of classic books are written in Baskerville. I still use these typefaces, but I use them specifically if I'm trying to create history with the brands, the advertising I'm working on, right? I can zoom into it. Look at this C. Totally different than Caslon, but beautiful. Look at the thick and thin stroke of this thing. Man, if you've ever used a width tool in Illustrator, when you draw a line and you make some of it thicker and some of it thinner, typography it does it for me. It's like awesome. So, and then you get more into, you know, the hand lettering form. This is every wedding you've probably ever been invited to. I'd probably say 85% of the wedding invitations were Bickham. I mean, this is it. I mean, this is like the wedding typeface, because you can do the print you're cordially invited to using the standard cap size letters, and then the fancy names, the McElroy wedding, they do it in the script style, right? Curved scripts. I mean, just beautiful. Just beautiful. And it does list other ones down here: Baskerville, Dido, and Bodoni. Other ones you probably see on your Apple or your PC computer, all the same stuff. And so this is just different looks and feels. You might want to go back later and kind of take a look. Look at the R here. Oh my gosh, look at the little shoulder curve on the R there. Just beautiful. I mean, there's some real applications for Dido that, you know, would be beautiful too, but really interesting. And remember that a lot of it has to do with the audience, what the application is, the thick and thin, the 45-degree angles, what's going on here. Look how tight the kerning is on this letter form, how the E practically almost touches the M, but it feels like there's a full shoulder space between the E and the N. It's all about spatial recognition. You know, this is all block tray driven. So these were just on a wooden block. They laid them out and it kerned like this. We do all this stuff manually now, or you should be, when you're writing copy that you're trying to emphasize, big headers, logo text, advertising campaign messages, all this stuff you should take into account. Look at the organic nature of the S there. I mean, I could talk about typography all day. I just absolutely love the extremeness of the personality of letter form. Look how vertically upright this M is. I mean, oh, geez, just beautiful, right? And so now you're starting to see italic letters versus Roman letters. This is Bodoni, 1788. I mean, look at the difference in personality. I'm not even sure you would know this was the same typeface, just a different family member, if you didn't match the A's up. Like, look at this kind of swath that kind of comes off the D here, but it's more of a kind of a leg serif on the Roman version of it. So, and a lot of it is, and like in Illustrator, you can type typefaces out. And then if you go to the character palette, it will write the font in the word that you typed out. And you can just use your arrow up and down key and go up and down your character palette, your font listing, your typeset, and see what each of the words looks like in the typeface you're choosing. That's a really good way to learn personality. So if I type in the word pizza and then I go over to my character palette and I use the up and down arrow, I can see what pizza looks like in Bickham script. And I can also see what it looks like in Futura. And I can also see what it looks like in Caslon. And you can start to see how it takes a different personality depending on the typeface. You might be selling $25 pizzas and you're using a script with the word pizza, and you might be selling a $3.99 large pie by volume and you're using a Helvetica Narrow, the most simple typeface ever in the history of typefaces, right? They have different behaviors, different personalities, and they sell to different audiences. So just know that. Like, we're going to learn a lot about type, and you're going to practice and play with a lot of different typefaces. Every student goes to DaFont and downloads their own typeface, and it's Skater graffiti text. And everything you type out looks like it's a bubble letter that they sprayed on a wall, right? Well, even those letters that are designed by those designers are using the behavior of the letter form to determine what the shape is, the kerning is, the anatomy of the letter form, the X and Y height of it. So it's good to know the history of. This is where I really started getting into it, close to the 1900 here, where you get to this advertising that, you know, they're selling bread and they need to have someone come into the bakery, and they're making these signs and they're making these really thick, fat face style, obnoxious letter forms, and they're able to put them on angles now. This is where kind of most people get introduced to circus posters, is what they call them, where you use 9 different typefaces and they're all huge and they're all caps and they're all different colors, and they're just using it to catch someone's attention in order to sell them something obnoxiously, pretty much. Monstrous typefaces. And this is where most people, if I asked them about the history of type and things they thought of, they would say circus posters, or they would say circus advertising, because they were big and bold and obnoxious and had very decorative typefaces, and they used a lot of them. No, that's around 1800. So we were talking 1400s when we were talking about the Gutenberg press, and we fast forward to 1800s, almost 1900, and we're getting into flexible type. We're getting into monster or fat face or decorative typefaces. And gosh, if you ever tried to collect anything, and maybe it was advertising, every early 1900 postcard had all of this kind of what I would consider overly ornate typeset, because they could do more with it. So they said, if we could do more with it, let's do more with it. Just because you could do more with it doesn't mean you should do more with it. So, but around the early 1900s, late 1800s is when you start getting into that. So you've probably seen these. They call them fat face. I mean, you probably have even downloaded a fat face typeface or two, like Gothic black, which is like super thick. But look at the difference of positive and negative space. You get to the point with this typeface that if you tightly kern them, you can't even read it, because there's more positive space than there is negative space. You see the little bowl inside this D letter form? There's not a lot of negative space. And if you've ever had me for any other design class, which this whole cohort has, I'm like, never outline type. The reason I say never outline type is because based on the type you choose, the positive and negative space weight of the letter form, if you put a stroke on the outside of this R, the interior bowl of that will disappear. The letter will become entirely black. And so I am not an outline of type person. It has a lot to do with kind of these fat face, bold typefaces, and that there isn't enough room in the kerning in order to really put strokes around letters and control the legibility and readability. And the bottom line at the end of this class, even though we're going to spend a lot of time just making things that make no sense with letters, numbers, and symbols, that is still legibility and readability. Every time I teach a class, I don't care if it's 4,000 level or 1,000 level, I spend a lot of time talking to the students and critiquing legibility and readability. I can't read what you wrote. I don't care how good your design is. Dark blue letters on black backgrounds do not work. I cannot read them. A website with a black body or table color with a dark red font on it looks obnoxious, yeah, but no one can read it. And it's not easy to zoom a web page in, so no one's gonna read it. So we're gonna explore a lot of what makes the shape of a letter, number, and symbol, importance of it. But do remember, at the end of the day, we're only pushing the envelope of typography so that you better understand legibility and readability. And what happens is, as a designer, as you learn typography and explore the letter form and learn more about design, is you start putting smaller words on your design. because you understand how to control the visual hierarchy of your elements of design. And you understand that a 7-point copyright is okay in an ad. It doesn't have to be 14-point, because you appreciate, understand the behavior of letters and the importance of elements over other elements. So that's the beauty about typography. Taking this class, you learn kind of the importance of things. So, all right, so we're about a little bit over halfway of this presentation. So we'll speed it up a little bit. We're just gonna kind of cut through, but look how thin the stem is on that U. Extra, condensed, double, which means bold, tall, and tight. I mean, if you're looking at the names of letter forms, condensed means really squeezed together. Narrow also means that. And if you see extra, bold, or black, that means really thick letter form. So you can kind of see this right here. This is even extra condensed. Can you read it? Oof. This big you can. You shrink this baby down at all, you can't read it at all. So know if you're using elements like this, you're using them as personality, maybe a watermark in something, not something that you expect someone to read, not part of your primary messaging. And so slab typefaces, just to kind of keep it going, still early 1800s, you know, we're just kind of pushing through from raw to now more ornate. So here is, you know, everyone's heard about serifs before, because I talk about serifs and sans serifs in design, but did you know there's antique, there's Clarendon, there's Latin, there's Tuscan, there's all these feet on letters. Man, I like antique Tuscan, these kind of triangular shapes, but there's all kinds of different serifs that makes up letters. So it's not just that it's a serif typeface. Look at the personalities of the serif, and look at how the idea Torrey had of circular, mathematical, human body adjustments to the letter form. That's how you get some of these serif extensions on it, where you kind of manipulate the letter form a little bit. When I use serif typefaces in branding, I actually outline my type and I make my own feet. Like, I'll actually adjust the serifs in the letter form to make it unique to the company that I'm working on. I may extend the crossbar. I modify the letter form so that no one can just type out the words to the business and make the logo look the way the logo is supposed to be. Hell, Oprah paid a designer to make an entire alphabet just for her magazine, because she didn't want anyone to be able to type out the information in her magazine and replicate her magazine. So that typeface was created just for her. And then after the usage license ran out on it, it was open for the public. So know that this is a big deal. This is big business. Like, you might end up being a type designer. Who knows? Like, it's a big deal. Almost 1900s here. This is what most people, if you say first advertising you can think of, this is what people see. You ever watch what's that pawn shop in Las Vegas where people are always bringing weird things in? Yeah, Pawn Stars. They're always bringing in early advertising like this. It looks just like this. It's circus advertising. That's how I explain it to people. Maybe you think of it as the wild, wild west, you know, when we're pushing through to a new frontier. This is the wanted poster in the window right here. So that, just to give you a grounding of the year. And I mean, look at the word moonlight and how it reads differently than St. Michael's. I mean, you can really control what's going on based on how you choose typography. It's center aligned. You should know about alignments, right? But look at this. This isn't center aligned down here. It's left aligned. So they even changed the alignment in the poster altogether, along with throwing a bunch of typefaces in there. So they're playing with scale. They're doing a dozen different typefaces, right? This is what most people think of. Earliest advertising you can think of. They're thinking of this. Coca-Cola, maybe. They're thinking of like the soap advertisements, the early 1900s stuff. They're thinking of this kind of style of advertising. So, and now you're getting into Dadaism. You may have heard that if you ever studied the history of art. This is 1923. Look at what we would call, I don't know, web dings or emojis or whatever. Look at the curved letter form. They're using symbols. I can't even read this thing, right? It's like all over the place. But now they can do fighting against what I would call designing on the grid, the letterpress grid, where you take the piece of paper and you make it like the math paper you used to use when you were a little kid in school, and you would draw little lines to make 45s and you would graph things out, graphing paper. Well, that's how I design a lot. I design on a grid quite a bit. This whole thing of getting outside of the grid and using the letter form as art, making the letters art itself, you're talking in the early 1920s or so. So, right, we started 1470 and we're already up to 1923. You can see the evolution of the letter form. We're no longer locked in the grid, stock stuff. We're starting to make personality of it. And there's something to say that people would stop and look at this for a really long time because they're trying to read it. If this is a poster in a window, that might be what you want them to do. You want them to actually stop and take time to read this thing. So you make it very ornate in nature and create something of art out of the letter form. I was always very appreciative. I really you can go to Target and find any packaging that the entire package is just letters, numbers, and symbols. There's a bunch of them out there. Just take a minute and look at them for a second and see how the designer controlled how you read the label or the packaging based on the shape, the typography, the placement of the letters, numbers, and symbols. I always think of Target. You go, there's a white carton and it says water on it. There is a white carton that says water on it, and that's the packaging. That's Target's water. It comes in a milk carton. It is a white carton with black letters that say water. And I'm like, how much did this designer make? They paid this person $30,000 to design a package. They made it white and they wrote the word water on it. I have to say it's genius. I stop every time. I've never bought it, but every time I stop and I'm like, I cannot believe they made a white milk carton with the word water on it. I mean, come on, that is awesome, right? But in today's day and age, if you look at that announcement I put about 2023 logo design trends, it's about handwritten and organic and non-shiny stuff. Well, once you go into that area of visual communication, you're talking about advertising with a lot of white space, and letters are really important. So I have a dog and a cat, so I'm always going and trying to find little treats and stuff for them. If you go down the treat aisle, the big thing nowadays for animals, if you own one, is non-processed food, right? They want to make organic treats and make organic dog food. Go down that aisle. If it's not a small symbol of a dog or a cat, it's like 95% letters. I mean, they just write what it is, all natural beef. And then really small, it'll say tidbits or something on it, right? But that's it. It's a piece of paper practically. It's an organic, recyclable material, and they just put ink on it. And that's water-based ink, and it's just letters, numbers, and symbols. So it's really important to understand that the 1920s is when we got to that point. So from now, wow, 100 years from then to now, we've come full circle, and it's now all about letters, numbers, and symbols, simple messaging, beautiful typography, and not overly embellishing anything. Websites are going to white space, simple letters, nothing super detailed, something that's responsive, that speaks to everyone, right? Icons are getting really simple because all the cars have them as ways to, figure out how to open the gas cap. I mean, I have a little hybrid truck. It took me 5 minutes to figure out where the icon was to kick the door, because when you open the gas door, it shuts a valve so that when you put fuel in it, the fumes don't go into another area of the car. And so you actually have to trigger the cap to get it open to put the fuel in it. Well, the icons are so simple and everything now, and they're all clustered together. It took me 5 minutes to figure out which icon meant what I was trying to do, right? So typography is really important in what we do. All right, we're into our kind of last little section here, and I'm just quickly talking about topics. You might want to go back and look at the letter forms and take a look at it a little bit more. But now we're getting into what feels like a little bit more raw, organic, hand style of it, right? The essential standard, the really clean, simplified, could have been etched in stone or written on a cave wall. Like, we're starting to go back. We're going back in essence. So just the nature of anatomy here, right? The nature of things. And then here you go, you're getting into that like really thick, weighted, cramped letter form in advertising with the decorative marks. I mean, you're going to see like a lot of things just kind of going over and kind of overlapping in description. So I'm going to speed through these because these are Jansen and everything, just so that I can start talking about modern typography, digital type. This is 1970. This one's 1990. You would think a designer made this today. This could be the logo for a music magazine that's all about edgy alternative music. I mean, 1917, are you kidding me? Avant-garde time. This feels like it was a digital clock that Apple made for its Apple Watch like this year. And it was made in 1917. Very pixel based, right? I really like this. I mean, I really love the letter form with this little kind of very modern serif thing going on here. So, all right. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of the logos nowadays. This is 1925 Bauhaus, but I'm sure you've seen typefaces where for the logo, they took a C and they rotated it 90 degrees and it was also the U, or they took a C and they rotated it 90 degrees the other way and it was also the N. See that N right there? You could actually rotate this N 90 degrees counterclockwise and it could be a C. And so typefaces like this, very circular in nature, you can make look at the P and Q, they're exactly the same, it's just mirrored, right? These are kinds of typefaces where you can start kind of making your own letters out of letters, or making a letter out of another letter, like the movie Seven, where they use the 7 and put it inside the written word of the 7 in order to kind of create a play on letters and numbers. That's really popular in advertising. They choose typefaces like this because all the letters feel the same in weight and stroke and thickness. And so you can flip them or mimic them or replace them and get the same experience, right? The H is just a flip to be the Y. And so this is the kind of typeface style you should be thinking about if you're playing a trick on it when you're trying to make things out of other things in order to make a brand. And so quickly, just going through, Futura happens to be one of my favorite typefaces of all time. It is a beautiful sans serif typeface, perfect anatomy, like works really well. You can write it on anything versus this dude did the new alphabet. Can you even read that? I mean, I've had students write things with this and it's brutal. Like I can't even read this thing. It looks like another language. There's A, B, C, D. I mean, that's an A. Are you kidding me? Like, how would you even know that was an A unless you saw it in the sequence of all of this? But this was the guy's idea to make an alphabet and make a play on the fact that it is an alphabet, kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke of it, no diagonals, no curves, and make letter forms out of it, 1967. And there are new typeface designers, and we're going to see one really quick, but look at this. I know that says new alphabet because it's written in a way where I can understand at least a few of letters. And introduction for a programmed typography. Like that's what that says. I mean, that's a stretch there. Okay. All right. So just kind of speeding through here so you can start to see designers really playing with the idea of pixel-based or digital age. This looks like Pac-Man typography, right? We're doing totally different stuff here. A lot of students, when they design their own type, try to do something like this, where they put like an underline under each of their letters to give them personality, or they try to do these bubble typefaces like this because they're easy to do with bricks to stack them and make these kind of shapes. But there's like no negative space to these letters. '90s, playing on two typefaces. So this is where digital type really comes into suit, where you're combining elements of multiple typefaces to make a typeface. And so you get a lot of that kind of experience going on. This is just a way to show you the typeset family and how the spacing of the lettering, God, that's beautiful right there. Like, I wish I could take a picture of that. Beautiful spacing and letter form right there. And look at how the R curves into the O. This is just showing you, based on this typeset, Mrs. Eves, how the family members interact and how you can use different ones in the same written statement, and it gives it a whole new personality. But you've heard from me before say things like, if you want to treat typography like a conversation in a room. If you're just having a regular conversation, it's regular. If you're yelling at someone across the room, you're using bold. If you're kind of whispering because you don't want to hear the entire room to hear what you have to say, you're italicizing it. So that's the nature of the behavior of type. Regular conversational type, regular typeface, regular font. If you're yelling, you're getting into a bold version, a thick stroke to the letter form. And the reason why quotes are italicized is because the behavior of the term italic is conversational. So like if you're having kind of personal conversation, you italicize it. Well, if you want to quote someone in a body of text, they traditionally italicize that, or what we call a call out. The reason they do that is because they're trying to give a personality to the written language as they kind of block through the text that they're using in their advertising. These two dudes, such a shame. They were designers in New York City. This is from 2000. This is Gotham, which I absolutely love this typeface. And they went around and they found old street signs, basically, from around the globe. And they would take the anatomy of a letter in the old street sign. So they found an old street sign and the Q was interesting. They would actually use a ruler, a piece of paper, they would stencil out the Q, and from the Q, they would create an entire alphabet. And then they would give that alphabet a name based on, you know, what the personality was of the sign or whatever. And they were world famous. I mean, they made the Freedom typeface for the Freedom Towers. I mean, they were like the gig. Well, they got in a fight over money or licensing or something, and they broke up. And so now they're doing their own thing independently, and they were at the peak of their profession and they couldn't get it together as a business goes. And so they fought and they ended up not working out. And so they did the Freedom typeface, and it's out of New York City and it's beautiful. Tobias, that guy's still, I think, kind of hanging in there. His partner is kind of drifted off into no man's land. So I don't know who the brains was in the thing, but they didn't really work out. But look at how beautiful the typeface is. I mean, oof. I mean, just beautiful. Freedom. It's now open to the public, but they created this typeface for all the signage and everything. And from a sign they found in New York City, they just created one letter, and from that they created all the other letters. But beautiful typeface. So now we went 1470 all the way to the year 2000, all the way from linotype, putting it in a tray, wooden slug, carved out the letter, block letter form, putting it in, starting to mass produce things like the Gutenberg Bible, all the way to nowadays, designers finding letters. I mean, I take pictures of found letters all the time when I'm out. There'll be a little manhole cover and there'll be a weird letter stamped in some name in the manhole cover, and I'll take a picture of it. I love doing found letters and just seeing what's out there. You can find little things that were, someone wrote the letter number or symbol on some sign in paint or something. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Like, I never thought about writing an A like that, right? Because handwriting is kind of unique to you. So I love found letters. All the way to 2000, and people were inventing type off of found letters, and it's completely digital. It never had a slug. It never started in a printing press. It was made specifically for digitally printing it, which is a whole new ball game, right? So when you go into Photoshop and you look at Freedom type and you zoom into it, they didn't care the pixels that made the curves. They weren't thinking about that. They weren't thinking about vertical and horizontal lines in the typeface, because it was made all along only to be used digitally. So, man, we went 800 years. I mean, we went a long time in studying all of the different relationships of type to see what's going on. All right, so that brings us over to type anatomy. So now we went 1470, the Gutenberg press, all the way through to the 2000 to the Freedom text or Freedom font. And, you know, what makes this thing, you know, what makes it tick? You know, what's the deal behind creating letters, numbers, and symbols? It all starts with understanding the anatomy of type. So your second mini project in Learning Module 1 is to illustrate the 20 or so terms that I put in the Word document attached to the project visually, like this. And you're going to see it right here. So what is a bowl? What is a counter? What is the loop? What does it mean to be a descender? Well, you know, when you type a letter or a series of letters or a word or a sentence, that it's on what's called a baseline, right? This is the baseline. So anything that goes below the baseline is called a descender, right? The letters descend below the baseline. The height of the lowercase letters is called the X height. Anything that goes above the X height is called an ascender. Ascender and descender. The little serif hook on a letter is called the shoulder. The lines that go across horizontally in the letter form is called the bar or crossbar. The body of the letter is the thickness of the letter, right? So these are the vertical line that makes up things like a T and an H are called the stem. So it's important to know when you use pen and ink and quill to make a serif typeface, where the pen stopped was called the terminal. The little circle that was created when you lifted your pen up when you did it with a quill pen and ink. Just important things to kind of understand when you're doing typography are some basic anatomical statements for the letter form. Remember, Torrey had the idea that was based on anatomy. So of course you'll notice shoulders and bodies and some of the statements kind of match that of what would considered kind of like anatomy or anatomical human anatomy type of terminology, but right. And that kind of swath loop there is the loop of the letter. And swath is one of the words in your anatomy for that kind of extended Q in like a script typeface where you kind of get that decorative kind of elongated leg on the letter form, but just knowing some basic terms. So like if you're interacting with someone, you're like, well, do you want something that's very vertical in letter form? Do you want things that have lots of descenders, or they go below kind of the line of the sentence or the paragraph? I mean, it's just basic terms that are important to know when you're communicating in a visual communication kind of environment. So, and some students they'll actually print the letters out. Like they'll just type out a bunch of words and sentences on a page, and they'll take a ballpoint pen and they'll color in the areas of the letter that are describing the areas they're describing. You don't have to go that far. You can literally just use little arrows and point it for your mini project too, just to highlight it. I always use it as like, the word chip is in some sentence someone used for anatomy of type, and I always use it as an image in my chat and stuff because they use my name in the descriptor for how to describe the anatomy of type. So that always cracks me up. But this is a nice way to do it, where it shows you the crossbar and it shows you the interior of the negative space of an O is the counter, right? And that here's the A sender, and here's the D sender, and here's a little serif here, and the little curve of the A is called the bowl, and here's the stem, and you have cap height, next height, and baseline. Very basic terms. You might have even used the terms at some point in time, like cap height's pretty standard, the cap height of the letter, how tall the capital letter is. I mean, you might have even used descender or, serif versus sans serif. I mean, but I don't know if you've ever used small cap, a letter that's slightly bigger than a lowercase, but not as tall as a capital letter. Some fonts have small cap as their family member. So your mini project 2 is to take the terms I have listed in the Word document and illustrate them like this. I already have a picture of it in the description of the mini project, but just know that that's what I'm looking for. And this is a really good presentation that highlights most of them and just shows you the different things. But it's a good way to kind of choose different typefaces so you can control what the different things means. When I was originally designing, I had to do things with a pica ruler, so I knew how big or small letter forms were. Well, pica rulers have gone by the wayside because lots of people's design in points now, like 12 point for body text and 18 point for like headlines up to 24 point. Just know that 12 points is 1 pica. So if you're doing 6 picas, you're doing 72 points. It's just a different form of measurement specifically for typeset. But nowadays with Illustrator, everything pretty much defaults to a point size. But you'll see here that the slug, the point size is the height of the slug. So the reason I say type is important for leading purposes, look at the bottom of a W in this typeface and a 12-point slug. There's actually space under there. So it's not a full 12-point height. It's more like 10.5 points high. So that's why manually spacing letters is really important, because look at the spacing in this based on the slug versus the spacing in this based on the slug versus the spacing of this based on the slug. They all start in the same spot of the metal or wood slug, but based on the negative space of the letter form, they take up a different amount of space. So you can't just stack these blocks next to each other and have the same effect, right? Because there's different spacing. So understanding anatomy, really important. This is the history of type basically in a nutshell. The humanist old style to transitional to modern, the slab serif, the fat typeface as we call it, versus the humanist sans serif versus the traditional sans serif, right? This is the written form from the 1400s. We turn the corner to the digital age, sans serif, and you start to get more of this. And then you get this really beautiful Futura typeface is what this is. And it's got that beautiful A. I use this typeface a lot when I need to illustrate something in a sans serif typeface, but just know this is the classification of type, and it's based on the historical evolution of typography from the 1470s to the 2000s in essence. So, and the names reflect that, but sometimes it's a little tricky because they throw Egyptian in there and you're like, Egyptian, that doesn't make sense. That wouldn't be that time period, but that was just a term used at the time for like primitive advertising, kind of those circus style posters. And here's where family comes in. I've used the term before in class. What family member are you going to use? Like how many family members are in your typeface? The bigger the family member, the better, right? Look at this, Adobe Garamond regular, italic, expert, semi-bold and bold, semi-bold and bold italic, regular and expert. I mean, numerals. I mean, like a lot of family members to use for Adobe Garamond. Well, you can really be expressive in your designs when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 family members in one typeface. Oh, Chip, I didn't break any rules. I only used 2 typefaces, but each of my typefaces had 7 family members. Well, that gives you 14 typefaces, basically. I mean, that's a lot. You don't need to faux bold something or put an outline on the letters to make it thicker if your family member already has a bold in it. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're choosing typography. Bigger family members, the better. Look at this. These are the Tobias. He did this one, 1993. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 family members in the interstate typeface. Guy's a genius. Right? If you can't make every solution you ever needed out of this typeface, I mean, you're not working too hard because that's a lot of family members. All right, the history of type over to the anatomy of type. So we've covered 1470 to the year 2000. We talked about now anatomy of typeface and what it looked like on a wood or metal slug using majuscule and minuscule letter forms, upper and lower case, to create kerning and leading to write sentences, paragraph, words. So the evolution is happening here in typography. Really important to understand in the world of typography. Spacing is the space between letters. Tracking is the overall space of a word or a line of text. Line spacing is the distance between baselines. The alignment is how you align things in the paragraph, left aligned, center aligned, justified, right aligned. And using the term hierarchy means using typographic cues to organize content, which means using bold and big letters to really control that as information number 1, using italic really small to make it the most least important text on the page. You control the visual hierarchy by the typographic cues, the font you choose, the family member, the scale of the letter form. Really important. We're going to kern like a champ in this class, trying to figure out what the correct spacing is between letters, numbers, and symbols. Just know that it looks different based on how much space you put. And look at the tracking of this line or this series of words when it's tighter versus when it's more spaced out. The T's are touching, the T's are barely not touching. Tracking is really important. You can adjust that in your character palette by word, by line, going up and down. And you really should do that when you're trying to write things. We call it leading because they used to use little pieces of lead to separate lines of text called line spacing, the space between the base lines. Look how tight that is. That's probably 10 point with 11 point leading. This is probably 12 point with 14 point leading. This is probably 14 point with 18 point leading. This is probably 18 point with 36 point leading. Like, you can see the difference of legibility and readability based on how much space is between the letters. End alignment, justified, flush left, flush right, centered. Really important when you're writing. Everyone looks at centered, they think poem or lyrics, because that's what poets do. They do verses and they do them center aligned. Lyrics on an album cover, which they don't make album covers anymore, I don't think, barely. Although I have a record player and I still buy modern music on a record when the artist release it. But this is like poetry record label kind of stuff. This is a magazine and newspaper, Justified. Newspaper loves Justified, right? And this is like web text, simple legibility text, and this is advertising, right aligned text. So just the different treatments based on the application, right? And you can see what works well and what doesn't. Look at Justified, look at the holes. I used to joke with the students, I would get a newspaper and I'd use a pencil and draw the map between all of the lines of text because there were weird spaces in it. That's a no-no. I mean, that's visually terrible. I mean, this isn't, I mean, it's not great, but it's okay. I mean, the punctuation is the problem. See how it indents it because the punctuation is there in right align. This is fine. It looks kind of lost because it's really small text center align in the middle of a lot of leading space, but tight kerning. Just looks a little bit lost there, right? And you can control, and we're actually going to do this on purpose in this class. We're going to align things to make shapes. And you see how this makes a wedge? The first line's the longest, the second line's the second longest, then the third longest, fourth longest, fifth longest, and the shortest. And this is called a widow if there's only one word at the end of a paragraph. Traditionally, that's the no-no thing. Don't make shapes per se, or something like a wedge where the shortest line is the last line. You want it to be more like an hourglass where the lines go in and out and curve in the paragraph so that they don't taper down to one word. But in this class, we're actually going to do that on purpose at times because we're trying to create visual shapes out of letters, numbers, and symbols. We're not doing it for the right or wrong way to do typography in an advertisement. And so you can see, and these are just examples, so I'm going to skim through them. Flush right can be bad with that much copy. Flush left could be nice, except for this widow word right here hanging by itself, right? Doesn't look as good with one word out there. You could stack vertical letters like this, or you can rotate it on its side. Look at the legibility of vertigo this way versus this way. We want to read up, not down. So this is really awkward to have it written down like this. Why do you think the spine of a book has like the author and publisher and stuff written up the spine like this? Yeah, they do the name like this at times, but legibility and readability are really controlled by stack. All right. Well, we're going to play with all of these. These are all relationship things. So visual hierarchy, indents, line breaks, that sort of things. Here's the idea of controlling it, bold, italic, underline, caps. You know, this is written like it's a quote, right? Feels a little bit different. Change the color, italicize things, bold face it, change the font family. Look how visually you control the page by changing the characteristics of the type. And this is how we're going to start. Type as art, right? Look at this. Logo design is the king of type as art. So you see how they combine letters to create one letter? Look at the B and the E blending together. I mean, typography is the master of type as art. They use the letter form to create shapes and kind of make things like GE. I mean, it's really beautiful. Mattel. They took the negative space of the letter form, put it on an angle to create energy, punched it or bled it through the shape, and they're really good with that. I mean, you could see, I mean, everyone uses typography as shapes in order to create really interesting things. So that's something we're going to explore, the understanding of the counter in the bowl and the negative space and what does with the extension of the stem and how it bleeds into the negative space. They're using the letter form to create shapes. That's really important in typography as it pertains to visual communication and specifically brand development or corporate brand application. And last but not least, in our week 1 presentations is legibility and readability. I don't care what you learn from this class. I hope first you learn an appreciation for typography and why you choose fonts and how you use the letters, numbers, and symbols to create visual hierarchy in your design, control what's most important compared to what's least important. But at the end of the day, you need to know that you have to be able to read the stuff. Legibility. You know, can they recognize the letter forms? Can they see each individual letter, right? Styles of typeface, familiarity, whether it's serif or sans serif, it's all the things that control legibility. And then when you get to the next, color, right? Dark colors on dark backgrounds is hard. Size and shape of type, you know, what background, what colors are using, these all influence things. Readability, line spacing, the arrangement of letter forms, widows or orphans, a hanging letter or a hanging word, all really important. I know it's kind of a drab week 1 historical background thing, but this stuff's really important towards our projects because it's the history of what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? Contour text, concrete text alignment, shape text, all kinds of negative space controlling, word spacing, leading, all these things control legibility and readability. So the summary of legibility and readability, it's really important to control the message. It's if they're not legible and they're not easily recognized, if it's not readable, the viewers don't comprehend the information. So we're getting into this world where it's more important to be easily readable than beautifully decorated. So just know that in typography, and both legibility and readability are heavily influenced by your choice of the physical anatomy of the letter form and how you use it. And designs must be easy to navigate and take into account the experience, the reading habits, and the psychology of the reader, right? You're communicating with the reader. So hopefully the history of, the anatomy of, and the application of type in those presentations gives you an appreciation for the letter form and what we're trying to do. And that's why week 1 starts with those presentations. Go back at the one that's about the history of type and take a look at those a little bit, because they are really important in the process of learning. So with those presentations under our belt, our first project is the type poster. We're going to play around a little tonight together so we can start laying the foundation for this project. The mini project 2 is type anatomy. I already talked about it in the type anatomy presentation. We don't have to practice that or look at it or anything. You just have to illustrate the definitions of that Word document using type the way the type presentation does. Draw little lines to the elements of the letter that shows you that you understand what the stem of a letter is, what the excite is, what the baseline, what the cap height is, all the basic anatomy, the shoulders. So that's an easy one. I don't need to practice that one. But this is there is no wrong answer project. This is the very first project in typography where we just get to play. Literally, there is not a wrong answer, but there's about a trillion solutions for it. Literally a trillion solutions. I give this project every year. I've been teaching it for 20 years over the course of all kinds of different delivery modalities, and no solution is ever the same. Literally, there are trillions of solutions for this thing. I would be interesting to ask the chat AI software that they're starting to talk about in the news now that like answers questions for you. I'd like to say, hey, design me a poster with only letters, numbers, and symbols that is abstract, and see what the AI comes out with, because it's going to come out totally different than you and I would create, right? It's using an algorithm. We've been talking a lot of time at the college because the Chat GPT is the current one that Microsoft launched not long ago, and people are using it to write papers. Because all you have to do is tell the Chat GPT, I need to write a paper that's 250 words about the history of type, and it will take the entire database of the internet, and using its artificial intelligence, it will write you a 250 word page. Yeah. And it does it like an author would, like it writes it correctly. It uses artificial intelligence and uses all of the references from the internet and creates things for you. People are starting to try to use it to design logos and stuff by giving the description of what they're trying to do. And it pulls it from the internet and combines up a bunch of things and tries to spit a product out for you. So we've been talking a lot about it at the university because there are sites that you can use that will actually tell you if what was submitted was created by artificial intelligence, which is a scary thing to even think about. Because I mean, we've had a few professors test it in a couple of classes and they're getting hits on stuff created artificially, which I just learned about in the news not long ago, and people are already using it professionally. I mean, it's really scary. I don't know if you saw Google is trying to introduce their artificial intelligence, I think they call it Bard, into their search engine. So when you use their search engine, it'll use artificial intelligence. And so it'll actually teach you stuff as it's searching for stuff. And the stock plummeted like $4 billion yesterday because they did a demo and the artificial intelligence software made an error. It stated something that was incorrect, and it's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be like perfect in how it sculpts itself. And so the stock plummeted today, like $4 billion was lost in stock because they tested something that had a glitch in it. So it gave it gave an incorrect fact, and it's supposed to search for everything based on its references to make sure that it was correct. So you don't get Wikipedia stuff where someone's just editing the text and putting any subjective thing they want in there. Well, it quoted something in its paper that was actually an incorrect fact that was stated, that was actually debunked and replaced, but it didn't figure it out. It gave it an incorrect fact. And you don't ever want to demo something that's supposed to be perfect and it not be perfect. It's like when Tesla rolled out the Cybertruck and they threw something against the window and it broke, and the window wasn't supposed to break. They threw like a lead ball at the window and the window wasn't supposed to break in the demo, and it actually cracked the window. And they said it was because they had tested it so many times that it had been compromised. It wasn't an individual hit. That area had been hit multiple times, but everyone was like, this is supposed to be an indestructible car. And he threw one thing at it and it broke the window. I mean, it did the hurricane window where it stayed in integrity. It just spidered it, but it wasn't supposed to do that. And they said through testing, they had compromised the window. So when they did, but you would think they would have used a new truck that had a different window and rolled the same one out there that they had practiced on for a few times. But so here's our first project. We're going to play around a little bit. I'm going to do about 45 minutes, hoping to be done the lecture around 8:30. And that'll give you time to kind of explore and play around and do what you want to do to start towards your Learning Module 1 projects. But so this is what you have to do. You have to create an 18 by 24 portrait or landscape design, 18 by 24 inch, right? So a big size poster. You can use Word, PowerPoint. You can use cut paper if you wanted to. You could cut out magazines and put this thing together. You could do it any way you want in any application you want, but you have to select one typeface. And we just did the history of types. So are you going to choose Jensen? Are you going to do Caslon? Are you going to choose Futura or Helvetica? Like, what are you going to choose? Times, Century, Old Style, Optima, Arial, Helvetica, Caslon, Adobe Garamond. I'd even be up for one of the not what I would consider traditional typefaces. So if there was really one you loved, stay away from Script, because that gets a little trickier because it's so ornate in nature. But I've even seen good solutions with a Script typeface. Pick a typeface. With that typeface, type out all the uppercase letters. Throw A through Z, all uppercase. Then with the character palette, type A through Z, all lowercase. Then with the character palette, type 0 through 9. And last but not least, with another character palette, type in the symbols above 0 through 9 on the keyboard, right? So now we have all uppercase, all lowercase, 0 through 9, and all the symbols above 0 through 9. So you have the parentheses, you have the ampersand, you have the percentage, the dollar sign, the hashtag, the @ symbol, the exclamation point, right? You have all those symbols up there. Now, You have to use all the characters only once. You cannot skew, you cannot distort, you cannot flip. It has to be, you can rotate it, but you can't distort it in any way. It has to be the letter as it's read. So you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, you can rotate it on an angle, but you cannot squish it. So if you're scaling it, hold down Shift. If you're using an application that doesn't scale proportionately, do not squish any letters. There's no distortion at all. It can only be black and white. So you can use part of the 18 by 24 document can be like a big black stripe through it. And all the letters that are on top of the black stripe can be in white. And all the letters that are on the white part of your design can be black, right? So you can use scale, you can change direction, you just cannot distort, and you cannot use color, and it has to be black and white only. Using only once all the uppercase letters, all the lowercase letters, the numbers 0 through 9, and the punctuation, the symbols above the 0 through 9. So, and that's it. That's all you have. And from that, let's see what you create. Now, I'm going to open up Illustrator, and if you're following along live, you can open it up if you want to and play around with just like I am, because I'm going to describe to you some of the terminology, some of the history of, some of the things we talked about in kind of the presentation portion of the lecture, at why I'm doing what I'm doing, or what I'm doing to explore what I'm doing, so that I can tie history and anatomy and things like that back to you while we're creating our solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. I'm going to open up Illustrator. I'm going to choose Caslon, I think. So I think I got Caslon on this computer. Well, I hope I have Caslon on this computer, even though lots of people use this computer and occasionally they add fonts and delete fonts and do all kinds of stuff. But I think I have Caslon. Okay. And now remember, for this class, because we're using any software application we want for each of our little mini projects and things we're doing, save it as a JPEG or a PDF, something that's flattened when you give it to me in Canvas so I can see what you did. I've had students do it with cut paper, and then they just took a photo with their phone of the thing they created and they sent it to me. That's perfectly fine. Like for the anatomy project, some students would type out on their computer like, "Design is the love of my life." And they printed it out on their home printer, and then they took a pencil and they just drew lines and labeled all the things for the anatomy. So I'm open to any part of the process just to make sure we're learning about typography correctly or appropriately, which also means we're not hand script lettering things as a solution for what we're doing here. We're using digital fonts, or we're using, a computer-based solution or an actual typeface. I don't want you drawing out letters manually. If you have a stencil, I'm okay with it, because stencils are a letter form, but I don't want manual handwriting. I don't want to do any manual handwriting because we're learning about typography. So we need 18 by 24, right? So I think I'm going to go 24 inches wide by 18 inches tall, because we don't have to do portrait. We can do landscape if we want to, right? We could do any format we want. And you can use any program you want. Any program you use is going to have 18 by 24 as a possible setting. It's not huge, but it's big enough. Now, the reason I like Illustrator, and if you're choosing a software application for any particular, style that you're doing, I would recommend choosing a software application that has a pasteboard, which is this gray little space out here. And the reason I'm saying that is because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the character palette, and I'm going to open that up. Now, if you're in Illustrator and you're following along and your character palette isn't visible on the right-hand side, remember it's window type character, and that's where the character palette is. And you need to open that up, because this is going to be your friend. So if you're using any software application whatsoever, the first thing you should find is if it has a character palette. And the reason that's important is because it has the font, it has the family member, it has the leading, it has the kerning, It has the line spacing, it has the X height, like it has everything you need in the descriptor of the character palette here. So we need the character palette because it controls what we're doing. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here. I'm going to go up to like, I don't know, 70 point or something over here. It's black right now. So if yours isn't black, make yours black. And I'm going to put the cap lock on. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. All right. So there's all of my uppercase. So we need all of our uppercase. So I'm going to do copy and paste, Command C, Command V. I'm actually going to cheat. And when I make a copy of all of my uppercase, I'm going to go to the type drop-down window, and under change case, you can make it all lowercase. So I don't have to type it once. Now, I do need to make sure I make this the typeface that I want. Adobe Caslon, there it is. Old friend. Now, look at the difference in kerning in all uppercase versus lowercase of the typeface. That's the same point size. That's 75 and that's 75. Just to give you an idea of the difference of every element of the anatomy of type based on the font that you select. So you should have a new appreciation for using letters, numbers, and symbols in your design after this class. Okay, so I have all uppercase, I have all lowercase. Now I need 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then I'm going to make a shift copy or Command C, Command V. And now I need to do all of the symbols above 0 through 9. So this is what I got to play with. All uppercase, all lowercase, 0 through 9, and all of the symbols. I'm excited already. I've just gotten started. Now, me, I'm a big positive and negative space person. Like I like playing around with positive and negative space in everything I do. I don't care if it's I'm reorganizing the furniture in my house. I'm always trying to see how to make things look different based on how I position it in space. And so that's no different with letters, numbers, and symbols, the written language. So the reason I love branding so much, and now that I only balance a few clients at a time, because I've been teaching full time for quite a while, I pick and choose what I'm going to do. And if I have my druthers, I try to always take the projects that start with building a brand, because I really like controlling the audience based on what I'm doing. Okay, now I have a blank canvas. What am I going to do with this blank canvas? And I'm using only each thing once. So whatever I got up here in the corner, I can only use it one time. I have this big 16:9 space, basically, this horizontal or landscape canvas, and I can do absolutely anything I want, but I'm not trying to write anything that you can read. Like I'm not trying to create a legible, readable thing. I'm trying to explore positive and negative space using the shape or positive and negative space, the body of the letter form. I mean, so literally I can do anything. And immediately some students are like, I'm going to build a house using the letters, numbers, and symbols, because I'm looking at this right here, and this looks like a mouth to a fish, and it's just the two parentheses above 9 and 0, right? So right away, someone's going to be like, I'm going to try to draw something using letters, numbers, and symbols. Now, the beauty about typography and the usage of it in design is changing the angle of it, changing the scale of it, changing the weight of it, bold, italic, regular. You can really control even what a whole page of copy looks like. So my original thing is, well, which letters look the coolest? Like I'm immediately, I'm like, the cool letters I want big, because the anatomy of those letters are what attract you to, you know, if you're using it for an advertising purpose. So I could tell you right now, the Q is awesome on this. So I'm going to highlight this Q with my text tool, and I'm going to copy it. And after I copy it, I'm going to delete it because I can only use it one time. So I'm getting rid of the Q, right? And then I'm just going to deselect that, and I'm going to open up a new thing, and I'm just going to paste the Q. So here's my Q. Here's my Q. That sounds funny. No pun intended. Okay, so I'm going to hold down Shift now, and I'm going to blow this thing way up. Yeah, that's okay. Just type a character palette and throw some letters on it, and just pick the letters you have in the character palette and just start making things as I'm making things. Like literally, you don't have to have all the letters to start with. Just know that only use it once. So if you only were able to type in the uppercase, just start creating with the uppercase. Just delete them as you use them. So if you go back later and add the lowercase into your little area up there, the little pasteboard area, you're only using it once. Because I will ding you points if I see the same letter, number, or symbol twice. And I'll tell you, I'm going to look at this thing because it's like an ink blot test. So when students submit it, I just look at it for a while and I'm like, it's quite interesting what they did there. So to me, it's just interesting to see how visually your brain works in relationship to positive and negative space using black and white compared to how mine does, right? And it's controlled by culture, it's controlled by environment, it's controlled by all aspects of your personality and what you've been exposed to. So it's really interesting to see, especially at Hodges, where we have international students and we have, you know, students from every area of the states, and we have younger students and we have older students. We have everyone that's experienced different things in their life. And when you give them a project like this, what do they create? Like, what do they see as beautiful? What do they see as interesting? What do they see as effectively creating a visual piece that doesn't say anything, doesn't really mean anything other than an exploration of type anatomy? And that's all this project is. But I got to tell you, your solution, we could print out on a canvas and hang probably in a modern art museum. Like, I've seen some crazy things in modern art museums, and I swear to you, I think they're just using a letter and building it out of wood and cutting a few pieces of it off and combining it with something else and nailing it to the wall and calling it artwork. I mean, you get some crazy things in modern museums. But so what I would do in this project is I would start with the beautiful things in the letter form, because I'm looking at positive space, not negative space. So for me, positive space really important, and that is the letter form, and it's black part of it, it's positive part of it, it's body of it. So I'm making this thing huge, because I really think that this thing being huge would be awesome. All right, so I got this thing here. I could rotate it, right? Does it look like a Q right now? It actually looks like a really weird 9. Like, it looked like a Q when it was typed out, but once you separate it, it's really interesting. So how do I want to do this? Do I want to make it look like an owl eye with a brow? Do I want to make it look like a music note? Do I want to make it look like what do I want this thing to look like? I'm going to do this. I'm just going to put it right here. Now, understand that a bleed comes into play too. So what if I do that? You won't have that part in the finished product. Maybe that's interesting. Maybe that makes it a little more dynamic than it was when you saw it on the page. Or maybe I went the purist and keep that right off the edge here. We'll see what we got going on. All right, so that's a beautiful letter. Let's go in and grab the R. So I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna paste it. I see a magnifying glass trying to zoom in on the R here, but the little serif is kind of bleeding into the other shape, so it's not quite getting there. But what if I did this? Ugh, what's in front of what? Is it? Because the Q is bigger than the R? So yeah, because the Q is bigger than the R. The Q looks like it's in front of the R. But if I made that Q red and it was in front, then you would see the stem of the letter in front of it here, right? So now I'm starting to blur the lines between foreground and background based on overlap in a black and white environment. I mean, you can really control what people see and how they see it based on controlling the weight of the letter form. Now, what's interesting is by rotating this, it's creating energy because it looks like it's trying to, is it rolling left or is it rolling right? Because the stem is going this way. So if I was drawing it with a pen, I would have looped it this way. But there's an argument that it feels like it's tumbling this way, counterclockwise, and it's about to go off the page. So when you rotate letters, numbers, and symbols, you generate energy in the letter form because it's not being propped by the stem or the crossbar of the letter form, right? The minute you rotate an E, like remember Toys R Us and they rotated the R? The reason they did that was because they were creating energy in the mark to make you look at it and try to figure out what's going on with it. So immediately when you scale something up, you make it bold, you rotate it, you italicize it, you lean it a little bit, you create energy. So this is an exploration of creating a dynamic space using letters, numbers, and symbols. All right, so I got to get rid of that R. Don't forget to do that because if you don't, I'm going to catch it. All right, so let's go on to the lowercase. I've always been a fan of the number 5. I don't know why, but in some typefaces, it's really beautiful. So I'm going to go with the number 5. Now, when I'm doing a project like this, I know that I've introduced it to you before, but I like to outline my type so that it becomes a shape. It's no longer a text tool object. And the reason I like to, I'm just right clicking and just doing create outline. So you see how it's no longer a text you can edit, it's a shape. Well, that's a really important part of the process when you're creating things like logos, because then you can use the Pathfinder tool and cut things out and like do different things with them. So, but it also helps in Illustrator if this is the choice program that you're using, because then you're not locked to the 1100 point scale size and typography. I can make this thing absolutely as big as I want. I'm trying to figure something out here. Every time I do this class and this lecture, I make something different. So what do we got going on here? Looks like somebody's falling over or something. Gosh, this is looks like fingers or something, doesn't it? Oh, like the lens thing? Yeah, it does a little bit. I'm gonna undo and get it back upright. I'm gonna leave it there because it was an interesting shape. But just to know in the exploration, you see the negative space right here? That is a huge no-no in design if it's close but not exact. Because this is actually what we call a booger in printing, when the ink doesn't print perfectly and it shows through a piece of it with paper. If you're designing, you want to make sure that there isn't an accident. That would be considered an accident. There's not enough space in it to be like that was a space that was supposed to be there. But for the sake of this project, I'm just trying to create something visually that looks interesting. And so I'm just kind of doing my thing here. So, all right, so we've got that so far. I'm going to go in. I haven't grabbed a symbol yet. So let's grab the little carrot dude thing. I'm gonna scale this up a little bit. I'm gonna outline it just because I like it as shapes more than I do. But you know what I'm gonna do? Remember, it's black or white. Let's see what I can get away with here. I'm looking for a space where I got enough stuff going on. Oh, that's interesting. Make it a little bigger. Oh, do not distort it. I'm going to use my arrow keys. I'm going to try to make it a little space.
Is there a setting in Illustrator so it won't distort, or you have to hold it
You hold down shift.
if you want to write?
Yeah, I hold down the shift key, scale proportionally. All right, so there we go. So that's that. Okay. All right. So I'm just playing around here. You can see what I'm doing. G. Delete that. Create an outline. All right. I think I've decided that I want to put a stripe through here. I don't know why. Just think it would be cool. Yeah, it starts to kind of mess around a little bit. All right, so now let me get my text tool. I'll take that. And it does have smart guides. And that's an interesting aspect if you're using Illustrator, because see how it tries to find the center of things? That was because designers have always designed, at least tried to, at some aspect of the design on a grid. So they put in smart guide so it finds the grid points in the document across the entire thing. Watch this. Like the minute you rotate things, you start to create energy. The minute you bleed off of the page, you start to create some level of dynamic thing going on. So I'm just going to do a couple of more letters here so you guys are getting the idea of what your mini project is. Number one, there's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see how your brain interacts with letters. No distortion, no color. You can reflect, you can rotate, you can scale up and down. You can use black background, you can use white background. Is that an E or an F? You saw me put an F there, but gosh, my eye is trying to make that an E just because of the 5 going this way. So your eye's like, what is that? Now, I don't want you to use the Pathfinder tool, but this is what it looks like when you start seeing things in positive and negative space. Let's do, not that one. Now look what's happening to the eye. Like this area is white, this area is black. It's all part of the same letter. And the reason your eye thinks it's part of the same letter is because of the way they touch as they interact. But boy, you can create some very visually interesting things. Don't use the Pathfinder tool, even though some of you are going to be like, I'm going to punch things out with the letters and stuff. I want to see what you do with overlap. So all of these letters are overlapping. So it's like, you know, what is happening here where the letters touch? But you start to get this thing that looks like a piano when you use the Pathfinder tool, because you get so much cutout where it overlaps. Remember the thing in the front and the thing in the back, wherever those shapes overlap, it creates white. You start to get too much of a kaleidoscope style of design where there's lots of black and white shapes kind of punching out all over the place. There will be a project in the class where we do use the concept of the Pathfinder tool, where you're creating shapes and punching shapes out and dividing shapes and adding colors to areas of the shapes. But it'll be interesting. You could do this for, like, you see how that thing isn't perfectly round because it was, that feels so much better to me. Like my OCD there did not like that cut off, because I knew that the counter in there was like a perfect circle. So I had to move that a little bit. Now look at it. Look how this looks perfect into that. But now I have a little weird tiny bit of white space right there where it's not touching right. Like I could adjust this thing a million times. But so you've got mini project one. Now you see the application of it. You can use any program you want. I've had students buy a book of the stickers at like Office Max and Home Depot, and they just had the upper and lowercase and all the numbers and everything, and they just peeled them off and got a piece of paper and just stuck them on and tried to figure out how to make something. That's permanent though. Once you put that sticker down, and you're not peeling it back up and putting it back down. So I've had other students buy the stencil kit, because they like to make things, and they just took the stencil kit with the upper and lowercase and the numbers and just stenciled in what they wanted to do. So you can use any program. I mean, it's an exploration process in Designing with Type class. So, but the end product, I need this thing as a PDF or a JPEG. So whatever program you use, if you do it organically, whatever the solution is, you need to give it to me as a flattened image. Because remember, you're using your own typeface, you're using whatever program you're using. I don't want an Illustrator file, I don't want Photoshop, I don't want Word, I don't want PowerPoint. All of the programs, any app you use on your phone, anything that you use, you can get a picture out of it. So screenshot it with your phone, like whatever it is. Don't give me a raw file. I want a flattened image. So a JPEG, a PDF, something like that. Okay, so that's learning. That's project number one. So I don't need to save it because I've done that thing about 8 million times. Sometimes I do it just to relieve stress, but sometimes I think I'm actually adding stress to my life, because it's like that thing's touching too much and it's driving me crazy. So you can see my type A personality. I need that thing to be like super clean. This was an old advertisement, an ad, and I used it as part of it because I love the X marks the spot. I love the rotation of the paragraph. I love the energy of the alignment of justified to left align to using the symbols, using black as the background and white as the letters. Like this is a really dynamic thing to me. Like I really dig this solution, and you can see the frames that are created. It's designed on a grid, but it has an angle to it. I mean, it's really beautifully done. So that just inspires you a little bit, I hope. So number two is type anatomy. So I'm just going to open it up just for the quick descriptor, but you can see it right here, anatomy of type with all the areas of it named. This is also out of a magazine, and I love it because it draws the lines without labeling the lines. So it's just an interesting typographical solution. All the details of the anatomy are over here, but it's written in here, and these are just like abstract lines determining what the things are. So it's really an interesting advertisement article. So this is more traditional. So 11 by 17, black and white, one-sided, and these are your words. Font, typeface, type family, serif, sans serif, Roman, italic, oblique. Obviously, you can use more than one typeface, because if I'm asking for you to show me the swash, you need a script typeface, because you need something that hooks at the end of the letter, right? You need something for some of these. So you need to vary the typeface on your 11 by 17 in order to describe all these things. If you don't see them in the presentation, Google them. I mean, there's a million anatomy of type image illustrations. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like if you Google it, it's like 35 pages of images that are all just anatomy of type. Again, I need it to be 11 by 17, black and white only. You can put it on an angle. You can write it like a sentence. I don't care how you do it. But illustrate, don't type out the definitions. Do not give me any definitions. I do not want the definitions. I just want these 20 words labeled in some illustrative way like this, telling me that you know what the things are. So it's really not hard at all. It's just, figuring out your format, figuring out how you want to lay it out. Do you want to type a sentence? Do you just want to do a bunch of letters, some uppercase, some lowercase, in different typefaces so that you cover all the descriptors? I mean, I've had students do basically 6 letters and different sizes and different fonts, and letters covered all 20 definitions. I mean, literally one word. See this? This is a crossbar, an uppercase, and a vertex. It's covered all in one letter. So you can do it with not a lot of stuff if you're really creative about it. So let's see how you do with that. Also a JPEG or a PDF, please. You can do it with a piece of paper and a pencil. I don't care, as long as you're not manually drawing the letters. The letters have to be printed or typed out or something, so you're using an actual typeface. And that brings us down to what is considered the out of book project for this week. So the first two are just explorations. Type poster, there's no right or wrong answer. You just have to make sure that you follow the instructions and do it exactly the way I want it. No duplicate letters, don't leave anything out. Even though leaving things out is a lot harder to determine, because if you use it right, everything blends together. It's really hard to tell if you didn't use the exclamation point, because you might see the dot and not a whole lot of the stem, or you might see the stem and not the dot at all. So that's a little trickier, but use the characters appropriately. And type and adding, just make sure that you define all of the terms. So simple projects, they can be fun and take hours. I mean, I've had people with the type poster be like, I did 12 hours on that type poster because I kept scaling, rescaling, moving, changing the position of. I had all the letters, numbers, and symbols on it, but then I started drawing things with it after I got them all on there. Like, you can get carried away with it, but not too bad. But the last one is what I would consider the out of book project for you, black and white only, and you're using your initials to make a monogram. So think of it like towels with your monogram on it, right? You're using your initials, and you're using your initials to create something visually interesting. Do I need to be able to read your initials? Not necessarily. You can use your initials and make a dog out of it. I mean, you can do really interesting things. But the thing about the monogram project is it's based on your font selection, upper and lowercase characters, and how you explore positive versus negative space using only 3 letters. And if you look at the article that I posted in the announcement section, a trend for 2023 in logo design is lowercase. Like, companies are writing their names in all lowercase. So that's interesting. So what does your monogram look like if you use all lowercase versus upper and lowercase versus all uppercase? I did this project in college many moons ago as a personal identity project, and we did it in typography class too. And I had to use AJM, or my initials, and we had to use it with a stencil and a Bic pen. And I got to tell you, I thumbnailed probably 1,000 different solutions of the A is the primary letter, the M is the primary letter, the J is the primary letter, just to create something visually interesting using only 3 letters. And so this is a great sketchpad kind of exploration. You know, take out a piece of paper when you're at a company meeting or sitting near a car for lunch, and just start taking your initials and drawing them differently to see how you can play with positive and negative space. It's a really interesting study. And I say, just make it into a 2-sided business card, just so that you can see what the nature of the type was in its more abstract form, which is the monogram, versus what the font was when you actually write it out. So all I want you to do actually as the business card is I just want you to do one section of your design just as the monogram. And then under the monogram, just type out fake business information so we can see what the foundation of your design started with, what the anatomy of the font was, what it looked like as a written word, and how you made it into something else, which is a visual thing of positive and negative space. So I term it the business card, but all I'm doing is saying, put your monogram at the top of your design and then type out like as if you were doing a fake business, so we can see what the font looks like when it's written out as legible, readable text. And it's a really interesting dichotomy of 3 letters as a symbol, and then that font family underneath of it written as written language. So it's a really interesting exploration. So if you chose a script font like Bickham to create an interesting monogram, a symbol, and if you do personal identity marks and you Google that, dude, you get so many illustrators, painters, designers that create something out of their name. You're going to get really interesting monogram solutions where people make some really creative things out of 3 letters. I mean, it's really interesting based on what font you use, what style the letter looks like when you use the font, and how you overlap it, scale it, place it, juxtapose it to create something interesting. Don't think of it as a towel where it's all the same size and it's just written next to each other like IBM. Think of it more like 3 letters interacting together with negative kerning where it's kind of all together and what it creates. You can make some really interesting things, but you can only use your initials. Don't replicate the initials. Don't use, I don't want 2 A's, 2 J's, 2 M's like me. It's AJM and what you can do. This was a study for me on paper. I did it with pencil first, well before I ever came up with the design for the AJM. But you know that the crossbar of an uppercase A is the stem of a lowercase j. So you could start thinking real quick, well, if I make this J bigger, and I can actually use a V for the A, because if I move the J up in between the V of the A, the V rotated, then I make the crossbar with the stem of the J, and I start to create things by merging things together. So it's a really interesting study of a very simple process. Create a monogram. That's it. Create a monogram. And then below the monogram, type in your name and some fake information so we can see what it looks like as a legible, readable text and what it looks like as a symbol of expression in the 3 letters of your monogram. And you'll give me that as a single document and just give it to me as a JPEG or a PDF. So you have the type as a poster, no right or wrong answer. You just have to follow the directions to a T, no pun intended. The second one is your type anatomy, not a hard project. I've had people make jokes by writing funny sentences or jokes and then labeling all the anatomy based on the funny statement they did. Like, I don't know, my favorite show was Office. So they take some famous quote from The Office and then they label all the anatomy of the letters by making the quote really big. It's up to you, but not a hard project. You just have to follow the instructions and label the 20 things. And then last but not least, the monogram. So have fun with it. It's black and white only. There's no effects. There's no distortion. There's no color or any 3 of these projects. They're straight typography. We're going to get to modifications, but we have to learn the fundamental elements first before we get to the modifications. So that was my lecture. I pushed about 2 hours. I tried to stay to 1 hour and 45 minutes. So now I'm going to end the recording, but I'll keep the chat on and you can play around. You have till, what's today, Thursday? So you have till next Thursday to do your first 3 projects here. Shouldn't be stressful, should be fun. And let's see visually what you come up with, because I can tell you by week 4, your application of typography will mature. And it will mature by nature because now you are seeing the history of the font, the anatomy of the typeface, and the visual hierarchy of why you do what you do with letters, numbers, and symbols. So you will mature as a visual communicator just by 4 weeks of type exploration. So I hope everyone has a good week. And we'll kind of see what you come up with. All right, guys, have a good week. I'm going to post a video, yeah.